It was an ordinary evening when I came home, the weight of the long workday still fresh, and my tired legs felt every step as I climbed to our small apartment on the third floor. The stairwell was quiet, smelling of dust and old wood, but those scents had long since become familiar to me. When I opened the door, I was greeted by the familiar smell of home, a mix of fresh paint that we had never fully aired out, and a faint hint of cinnamon that had soaked into the furniture from last year's Christmas. I had hoped that this evening would be peaceful, that I would finally be able to sit down and simply relax. But that hope shattered as soon as my eyes met Mark's, sprawled on our old brown sofa. His posture exuded total relaxation, as though he owned not only the apartment but also my life. In one hand, he held the remote, casually flipping through channels, in the other, almost an empty beer bottle. The TV screen flickered with some pointless show, but as soon as I entered, his attention shifted to me. "Hey, Hazy," he said dryly, not even bothering to greet me. "I want a pie tonight." I froze, blinking, trying to process what I had just heard. "Wow, Mark, I just got back from work," I began, holding back my irritation. "I'm tired. Maybe tomorrow?" He grimaced as though I had just suggested something ridiculously stupid. "You're home now, aren't you? So make the pie. It's not that hard." I sighed, feeling the weight of long-simmering frustration settle back on my shoulders. My mother had always taught me to be understanding and accommodating, to say yes when I wanted to say no, but in moments like these, I realized that it was precisely these pieces of advice that had made me a prisoner of my own compromises. Trying not to react to his words, I made my way to the kitchen. Our apartment was small, just one bedroom, a combined living and dining room, and a kitchen the size of a closet. I opened the cupboards, pulled out the ingredients, and began preparing, hoping to finish as quickly as possible. Maybe if I made the pie, the evening would go smoothly. While I was rolling out the dough, Mark peeked into the kitchen. "Only apple," he called over his shoulder. "And don't you dare use store-bought crust," he added, before disappearing back into the living room. I nodded silently, not trusting myself to speak. We did have store-bought crust, but I knew better than to use it. It would only make his mood worse. I made everything from scratch. I peeled the apples, sliced them thinly, mixed them with sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of nutmeg. The smell filled the kitchen, giving it a nearly festive atmosphere. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe the pie could melt the ice between us. But as soon as the timer went off and I took the pie out of the oven, my hopes were dashed again. Mark appeared in the kitchen just as I was leaving the pie to cool on the counter. Without waiting for it to cool, he cut a piece, took a bite, and his face twisted in displeasure. "What is this?" he spat out, throwing the piece back onto the plate. "You should have known how to do it right. This is awful." Without another word, he picked up the plate and threw it to the floor. The pie fell with a dull thud, shattering into pieces. I froze, staring at the mess. Tears burned my eyes, but I held them back. "What's wrong?" I finally managed to say. "Everything," he replied curtly. "You should have known better." Gathering what was left of my dignity, I bent down to clean up the broken pieces. All of this, not just this moment, but years filled with scenes like this, weighed down on me like a heavy burden. It wasn't just a pie, it was our relationship. Broken, splattered, and hopeless. And that night, for the first time, I wondered how much longer I could stand this. I couldn't stay in that apartment. I couldn't be in that place where every corner was soaked in disappointment, and the air was poisoned by indifference. I needed to be with someone who understood me, someone who cared about me, someone who wouldn't throw my efforts on the floor like an empty pie plate. I grabbed my purse, my mind racing with thoughts that wouldn't let me rest. Why did I keep staying in this marriage? Why did I tolerate all of this? But there was no time for questions, and without thinking, I decided to leave. To leave for at least one night, at least for an hour, but to be somewhere I could be myself. I got into the car, not paying attention to the noise of the wheels on the asphalt, not thinking about anything, only about getting to William. He had always been my support, the one who, like before, could understand me. William's house was a cozy 2-story building with a small garden, where flowers always bloomed even in the cold months, and where the scent of wood and old books lingered. When I pulled up, I didn't even have to knock. He must have heard my car because the door opened before I even reached it. His face immediately changed, his gaze full of concern, like someone who had been waiting but still wasn't ready for what they were about to see. "Hazy," he said, pulling me into his arms. I felt his hands wrap around me with such strength that suddenly it became easier, though I didn't understand how that was possible. The tears I had been holding back in the car began to flow down my cheeks, and I didn't try to stop them. "He threw the pie," I mumbled, pressing my face into his shoulder. "He just threw it on the floor, everything I made. Everything I tried for him. It doesn't make sense, William." He didn't pull away, just shifted slightly so I could settle more comfortably on the couch. He sat me down, handed me a cup of hot tea, and I felt the warmth seep into me, a kind of protection from the cold I carried with me. The warmth of the tea, unlike Mark's cold words, gave me the strength to speak. "I'm so tired," I began, sipping the liquid, trying to find the strength within me. "I thought everything would change, that he would change. Do you remember when we first met at Jenna's party? He was so charming, so attentive. I believed he would stay that way, William. I believed." William nodded, his gaze filled with sympathy, but he didn't try to comfort me with words. Instead, he quietly said, "I remember, Hazy. But people can pretend for a while. Their true face always comes out in the end." I realized he was right. For so many years, I had thought everything would get better, that he would care for me again, that our relationship would return to the way it was when I first fell in love with him. But over time, I started to see how his attitude towards me had changed. He became more demanding, more critical. Sometimes, I felt like I was no longer a person to him, but just an object onto which he could unload his tiredness and frustration. I continued. "When we first got married, everything was perfect. We went on dates, laughed, talked for hours, but over the years, I just saw his true face." William listened silently, and when I finished, he sighed. "You know, your mom and dad had their problems too, but your dad never treated your mom the way Mark treats you." I shook my head, tears welling up again, but I tried to hold them back. I had thought I could change Mark, that I could make him understand how hurtful it was to live with him, but no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. William continued, his words quiet but firm. "Hazy, love doesn't work that way. You can't change someone who doesn't see a problem with their actions." I felt something inside me break, and it became hard to breathe. Yes, I kept thinking Mark would change, that he just didn't understand how much he needed to. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't true. Seeing my inner turmoil, William said, "You deserve better, Hazy. Do you remember when we were kids, we promised each other we'd always be there? I'm here, and I'll always be here. Now think about yourself, about your happiness." His words hit me, and I felt something shift inside me. I understood that this was not the life I had imagined. I deserved respect, love, care. And this wasn't something I could ask for or demand from Mark. It was something I had to allow myself to have. "You're right," I finally said, looking down. "I can't live like this. It's time to make a change." William squeezed my hand, and I felt his support warm me. I knew that now, I wasn't alone. The decision to divorce Mark brought with it a mix of relief and fear. It felt as though the world around me had suddenly become clearer, like the fog had thickened and finally cleared. But this clarity was cold and harsh. It exposed me, my vulnerability, putting all my expectations and fears on the line. When I went downstairs, I found William already up and making breakfast. He was in his usual rhythm, as if the morning tasks of bread and eggs were his only world, where everything was in its place. In the kitchen, amidst the smell of frying eggs and toasted bread, his face was bright, but there was care in his eyes. I felt his warm smile, almost invisible, wrap around me, making me forget my worries for a moment. "Good morning," he said, looking at me with gentle attention. "Good morning," I replied, pulling the chair out to sit at the table. He placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of me. "You need to eat," William said, his voice full of softness. "Today is a big day." I nodded, unable to hide how hard it was for me. I took a bite, feeling the hot food melt on my tongue, but it didn't bring comfort. I was nervous, and that anxiety wouldn't leave, despite his care. We both knew that changes lay ahead, but I was ready to face them. "It's the right thing," William said, sitting across from me with a cup of coffee. "It's never easy, but remember, you're doing this for yourself, and I'm here, with you." After breakfast, William drove me to the lawyer's office. I could feel the excitement pulsing inside me, though I managed to keep calm on the outside. When we parked, I took a deep breath, preparing for the next step, for what came after the word divorce. A few steps away from us, Mrs. Harris met us, a woman with a cold gaze, but an unexpectedly warm voice. "Hazy," she said when we entered. "I understand this is a difficult time for you. My job is to guide you through the legal process and ensure your interests are protected." "Thank you," I whispered, feeling grateful for her calmness and confidence. It was hard for me, but her words became my anchor, helping me not to drown in this sea of uncertainty. The meeting with the lawyer was long, filled with legal terms, papers, and formalities. Mrs. Harris patiently explained all the steps, convincing me that I was making the right decision. I immersed myself in the details, but couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness in my soul. With each passing day, weeks turned into a whirlwind of meetings and signed documents. To my surprise, Mark remained silent. He didn't contest the divorce, didn't sign the papers, didn't try to contact me. He simply disappeared from my life like a shadow dissolved into the night. This silence was unsettling, like a curse that hung in the air. One day, when I was sitting with William in his living room and expressed my concern, he thought for a moment, then said, "It's strange, especially considering what he used to be like. But maybe he realized his mistakes and wants to move on. I hope that's the case." I sighed, but the painful doubt remained. What if his silence was just a game? What if he was waiting to put me in a difficult situation? But despite all these questions, life moved on. I began looking for a new place to live, a place where I could start fresh. After several weeks of searching, I found a house that struck me the moment I saw it. It was a simple yet beautiful building, with large windows that filled the rooms with light. It was a stark contrast to the dimly lit apartment I had shared with Mark. When I stepped inside, I felt as though this place was made for me. It marked the beginning of a new phase, a new path. William was thrilled when he saw the house. He assessed it immediately, without hesitation. "This place is perfect for you, Hazy. You can call it your own." As we toured the house, I was already making plans. I wanted to paint the walls a light blue, maybe put some plants by the windows. He smirked. "Always the planner," he remarked. "Sounds wonderful." The move was a joyful event. With William's help and a few friends, the house quickly began to feel like home. Every evening, after work, I returned to this cozy refuge, and every corner gave me a sense of safety, peace, something I had lacked for so many years. It was a place where I could be myself, without the falsehoods and pain of the past. However, this idyll didn't last long. One fateful evening, when I returned home, I noticed something strange by the front door, a can. A chill ran down my spine as I opened the door. My steps became cautious, anxious. I stepped inside and saw something that was both unexpected and disturbing. There, in the living room, sat the mark of my heart. I rushed forward, though my steps became quieter, and my heart beat louder. When I finally entered the room, I was faced with a scene that seemed impossible. Mark was sitting at my dining table, surrounded by his scattered belongings, so ordinary it momentarily disoriented me. This was my space, my sanctuary, and he had invaded it like an uninvited guest, violating every boundary. The feeling of intrusion rushed over me, almost physically painful, tightening around my chest. I looked at him, trying to contain my emotions, and my voice came out with unexpected force. "What are you doing here, Mark?" I demanded, feeling a storm building within me. He lifted his gaze. There was none of the usual guilt or regret in his eyes. Instead, his face wore a look of self-satisfaction, a sinister calmness, as if he had once again reclaimed his sense of dominance. He didn't rush to respond. Only after a pause did his voice come out, cold. "Well, this is our house, isn't it? We're still married, Hazy." He smirked, wrapping me in his gaze. "Did you forget?" I tried to remain calm, but inside, I was boiling. This was not our house, it was mine. I had bought it after we separated, and it had nothing to do with Mark. "I bought this house after we separated." "It has nothing to do with you," I retorted, feeling the words burn. Mark leaned back in the chair, ignoring my words. His smirk grew wider, and with each passing moment, his audacity and confidence grew. "It doesn't matter what you say, as your husband," he said. "I have every right to be here." A wave of anger washed over me. This was more than just an intrusion. This was an attempt to return to my life, to my world that I had rebuilt. But at that moment, the door opened, and Anna entered the room. She looked embarrassed, her face reddened with shame. I barely held back a look that could have turned her to stone. "I'm so sorry, Hazy," she said in a low voice, showing me her ID and marriage certificate. "He said he had the right to be here." I felt a tightness in my chest at this admission. I didn't know what to do. Everything was mixed up, and I couldn't even feel anger. I just sighed, trying to keep my composure. "It's okay, Anna," I said calmly. "This isn't your fault." I turned my attention to Mark, his rigidity, his confidence. I stood before him, on the verge of total destruction, but I couldn't let him see how I was crumbling inside. I had to be strong, for myself, and to not let him tear me apart again. "You need to leave, Mark," I said, feeling a bit lighter. "This is my house, not yours." Mark smirked and stood up slowly. He walked over to me, got close, and whispered in my ear, his breath heavy. "Think again, darling," he said, smiling. "I'm staying here, and if you try to kick me out, I'll be sure to claim half of everything we had in the divorce." His audacity made me waver, but I didn't allow myself to give in. I understood that if I showed weakness, he would win. I had to stand my ground, showing no fear. "Fine," I said, trying to sound calm. "Stay today, but tomorrow I'll find a lawyer, and we'll see who has the right to be here." Mark grinned as if he had won the battle. Feeling defeated, I retreated to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. I needed to come up with a plan, and I knew that the only way was to act decisively. Grabbing the phone, I dialed William's number. His voice, as always, was my salvation. "Will, he's here, in the house. He says he has the right to be here." I could barely hold back my tears. William's response was filled with anger and concern. "Stay calm, Hazy. I'm on my way. We'll sort this out." Hanging up, I felt a surge of strength inside me. His voice was my anchor, my only refuge. I felt my heartbeat slow, and the tension began to ease. When William arrived, I knew everything would be okay. He and Mark whispered about something downstairs, and the tension in the air was palpable, like a thick wall. Minutes dragged on, feeling like an eternity, and finally, William came up to my room. His face was more serious than ever. "Hazy," he said with a firmness that instantly gave me confidence. "When we bought this house, I made sure it was in my name. I had a feeling Mark might try something like this. Legally, he has no claim to this property." It was the moment when all my anxiety melted away. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank you," well, I barely managed to say. "I don't know what I would do without you." He hugged me, and it was the only thing I needed. We were family. We cared for each other. The next morning, armed with the property documents and full support from William, I confronted Mark. When he saw the documents, his confidence vanished like smoke. He realized he had no grounds for his smugness. "This isn't over yet, Hazy," he hissed as he left. Days turned into weeks, and Mark's intrusion became something distant, almost forgotten. But the threat he posed remained. William and I, however, weren't about to sit idly by. One evening, as we sat in the living room, William looked at me with a seriousness I rarely saw. "Hazy," he said, "I think we need to be ready for anything Mark might do. He's unpredictable." The woman standing before me looked withered, like an autumn leaf that had lost its brightness. She could barely stand, trembling from the cold and emotions, her eyes dull, filled with pain and despair. I couldn't take my eyes off her face. I felt something cold and sharp tighten in my chest, and despite the internal struggle, I couldn't help but feel pity. She was as lost as I was, but for a different reason. How did she know about Mark? "Come in," I said, stepping back and allowing her to enter the house. She stepped into the hallway, leaving puddles of water on the carpet, and I closed the door behind her, noticing her agitated appearance. She clearly hadn't come with good intentions. She didn't seem to expect me to greet her so calmly. Trembling, she continued, I know you probably hate me for being with him. But I had to come. Mark, he's not who he pretends to be." I froze. The silence hanging in the air was heavy. I understood that this was important, that she hadn't come just to explain her side of things. There was something more in her words, something that didn't fit the usual picture. "What do you want to tell me?" I asked, trying to speak evenly, though inside, everything was burning. She took a deep breath and sat on the edge of the sofa, wiping away her tears with her hand. I didn't rush her, knowing her words would be heavy. Jenna began her story. "I met Mark a few months ago. He was so confident, so charismatic. He told me he was having trouble with his divorce, but that didn't matter. He promised he would do everything to be there for me. He wasn't who I expected when I first met him, and when I found out about your story, Hazy, I got scared. He intimidated me, threatened me that if I told anyone about what happened between us, he'd make my life miserable. And I'm afraid he'll keep doing that, because he's the same with you." My mind started racing. I couldn't find the words to respond immediately. What kind of person was this? How could I live with the realization that Mark, the one I had once built my happiness with, the one I considered part of my life, had been deceiving me throughout our marriage? He kept manipulating and playing with other people's lives like toys. And I was just a pawn in his game. "Jenna," I said, trying to collect my thoughts. "Why are you telling me this now?" She looked at me with eyes so full of pain and regret that I felt something inside me tighten with pity. She wasn't the enemy, she was just a woman lost in a sea of lies and manipulations. "Because I can't stay silent anymore," she answered, clenching her hands. "I'm afraid for myself and for others. I don't want him to ruin your life the way he ruined mine. I have to tell you the truth about him, because if I stay quiet, He'll just keep going. I know how he works. He manipulates people, uses their weaknesses, and now I see that you're his victim too. I don't know what he promised you, but I feel like you need to know everything." I was silent, giving her space to speak. My mind was in chaos. So many questions. So much confusion. And this woman, now standing before me, was ready to reveal to me the thing I feared most, the truth about Mark. "You're right," I finally said, looking away as though trying to gather my thoughts into one. "I don't know what to do, Jenna. But I need to know everything. You say he manipulates people. I can't live in ignorance anymore. I want to know what's been happening these past months." She sighed, wiping her eyes again, as if her words were too heavy for her. I didn't know what to expect, but I already felt that this meeting would change everything. I sat in the chair, my head full of turmoil. Jenna's words, her revelations, wouldn't leave me. The very Mark I had once loved turned out not just to be a deceiver, but a true monster. He was really willing to do anything to destroy me, even using his connections and threats. All this time, I thought I knew him, but now it seemed I knew nothing. William sat beside me, his face tense, his eyes as hard as steel, but I could see his fist clenching. His eyes met mine, and despite the gravity of the situation, I felt his support, his determination to protect me. He had always been there, and I was starting to realize just how important he was in my life. "We need to do something about this," he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "We can't let him continue terrorizing people, Hazy. This isn't just a threat, it's a real danger." I nodded. What William had said made sense. Mark wasn't just a person seeking revenge. He was ready to destroy everything I held dear and ruin the lives of others, including Jenna's. This wasn't just a personal matter anymore, it had become something I had to act on. With each passing day, I realized more and more that Mark wasn't just an evil person. He was a master manipulator, hiding his true intentions behind false promises and charisma. He played on people's emotions and weaknesses, and every time they fell into his trap, he used them. And I was one of his victims. Jenna was another. Together with William, we began gathering evidence. She helped us, revealing details I couldn't have even imagined. We dug into his financial schemes, his connections with those who might help him, and soon it became clear that our enemy was far from ordinary. He was weaving a network of lies and manipulations, and now, thanks to Jenna's efforts, we were getting closer to exposing it all. When the time came to approach the police, I felt a mix of fear and determination. Walking into the police station, I thought, will they believe us? Will they take our evidence seriously? When we presented all the facts to Detective Rogers, his face showed no emotion, but I could feel he understood the importance of what we had brought. He listened carefully, asked questions, and in the end, said what I had been waiting to hear. "These are substantial pieces of evidence. We'll continue investigating, but from what you've shown, it's clear that Mark is involved in illegal activities." I couldn't believe my ears. We had truly done a huge amount of work, and now it was in the police's hands. I felt relieved, but at the same time, fear still gripped me. With Mark behind bars, I could breathe easy, but the thought of his allies, of the people who might still support him, kept me on edge. A few months later, Mark was indeed locked up. The world seemed to return to normal, but one thing still troubled me. What if his friends, the ones he had mentioned so often, could still harm us? One evening, returning from work, I noticed that something was wrong. My mail was scattered across the porch, and the door appeared to have been tampered with. A cold fear seized my body. This was too much. Someone had tried to break into the house. In panic, I grabbed my phone and dialed William. "William, I think someone tried to break into the house," I breathed, struggling to stay calm. His voice sounded firmer than ever. "Stay calm, Hazy. I'm on my way. When William arrived, he carefully examined the scene. His face remained impassive, but I could see him tightening his nerves. It was an attempted break-in, he confirmed. We need to reinforce security. We have everything we need to protect ourselves. Over the next few days, we worked on strengthening the security of the house. We installed surveillance cameras, upgraded the alarm system. Everything was set up, but the unease in my heart didn't fade. I still feared he would come back. That fear wouldn't leave me. And then, one evening, while we were testing the system, the alarm suddenly blared, and a warning signal appeared on the screen. William and I immediately looked at the monitor. A person. They were wandering around the house, but before they could do anything, the police arrived at the scene. I felt the tension in my body ease, but the sense of unease remained. Now I knew for sure, this wouldn't end until I destroyed his network. But I also knew that with William by my side, we would be ready for anything. The police arrested the intruder. I felt relief wash over me, but that rush of gratitude for William was even stronger. He wasn't just by my side, he was acting. His foresight had prevented another potential disaster. He knew Mark was capable of anything, and I could only thank my lucky stars that someone like him was there to protect me, even when I doubted I could handle things myself. The next day, after a tense morning, Detective Rogers called me. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension. "We've apprehended the intruder," he said. "He claims Mark sent him, but we're still working out the details." These words confirmed my worst fears. Mark was indeed trying to control me even from prison. His grip hadn't loosened, and despite all my efforts, he kept building his networks, using the people around him. He was like a monster that never rested, even behind bars. A few days later, as I was trying to gather my thoughts and recover from yet another blow, Jenna called me. Her voice was anxious, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "Hazy, there's something you need to know," she said, slowly and nervously, as if she didn't believe her own words. "Mark's been contacting people from prison. He's trying to spread lies about you." I gritted my teeth, feeling that poison seep back into my life. All this struggle, all the effort to finally break free from his control, seemed pointless. But I wasn't that weak woman anymore, the one who had once fallen for his manipulations. I knew that Mark wouldn't get away with it, and I would do everything I could to make sure he would never again have any influence over my life. That evening, when William suggested the idea, I was ready to take it as the final and decisive battle. He said, "We need to switch roles. We have evidence, Jenna's testimony, and much more. Let's bring this to light. Next week, we'll hold a press conference and let the whole world know the truth." With William's contacts, we prepared for this crucial step. The press conference became the culmination of all our efforts. Reporters, journalists, everyone wanted to hear my version of events. When I stepped up to the podium, my heart was pounding in my chest, but I understood that this moment was not just for me, but for everyone who had suffered, for those who had gone through what I had. I looked around the room and began speaking, my voice perhaps trembling a little, but I was determined. "Hello, everyone. Today, I want to share my story. Not only to expose Mark's cruelty, but also to give hope to those who are trapped in abusive relationships." I told everything in detail, from our first meeting to the most painful moments, from Jenna's revelations to how I became a victim of an attempted break-in. The room was silent, all eyes were on me. When I finished, the journalists began asking questions, and I answered them confidently. "Do you believe Mark is still a threat?" one reporter asked. I looked at him and answered without hesitation. "Yes, but I won't let him, or anyone else, intimidate me any longer." Another reporter asked, "What do you think of him now?" I paused for a moment, thinking. But in the end, I replied, "I feel sorry for him. Anyone who harbors so much hatred must be really unhappy." After the press conference, the support I received was overwhelming. Messages and calls flooded in. Women shared their own stories, and it was clear I wasn't alone. My revelation had sparked a movement that could help many. With each passing day, I felt my strength returning, along with my confidence and peace of mind. That evening spent with William was special. We sat together, and I felt the weight that had burdened me for so long finally lift off my shoulders. William smiled warmly and said, "You did great, Hazy." I looked at him, and the shine in my eyes was so bright that tears filled them on their own. I nodded, understanding that not only had I overcome that nightmare, but I had also regained my life, my strength. He was right, I just needed a little time and the support of people who believed in me. The next morning, William brought me good news. He was full of determination, his eyes shining with joy. "Remember the uninvited guest," he said when I looked at him with a question in my eyes. I nodded, recalling the fear and tension of that night. "He got his sentence," William continued. "All the evidence against him is gathered. He'll be behind bars for a long time." I felt a sense of relief, as if a mountain had been lifted off my shoulders. It was truly nice to hear. But William didn't stop there. "And that's not all," he added. "Mark has been moved to a high-security prison. Because of his antics and connections, he won't be getting out anytime soon." My heart filled with gratitude, and I hugged him tightly. "Thank you for everything, William. You were there when I was alone, you became my rock." William smiled, and there was so much warmth in his eyes. We were together again, and now nothing could destroy what we had built. Our family stayed together. Weeks turned into months, and life returned to its rhythm. I reconnected with friends, created a support group for victims of violence, and even started meeting new people. On my birthday, I threw a small party. A huge crowd, including William, Jenna, and my new friends, gathered to celebrate the day. When I looked at their faces, I realized how far I had come. The wounds of the past were starting to heal, replaced by the joy of new memories. And so it went on into the late night, when everyone had left. William sat next to me, and his words were a comfort. "You did great, Hazy." I looked at him, and tears sparkled in my eyes. This wasn't just a birthday. It was the day I got my life back, my strength,